So what we're going to learn is it's a short passage from the Zohar, which is actually in the Zohar, it's a very long passage. It's part of what's called the Sabbath Mishpatim. Sabbath Mishpatim is the old man of Parshas Mishpatim, and that's where all the Inyanim of Gilgulim, of reincarnations, comes from in the Zohar. There's other places also, but it's the main source. It's actually quite long, and the way most of the things in the Zohar happen is that they happen as two Chachamim are walking along the path. And then in this case, actually one is going to meet the other, and they meet at an inn. And when they meet at the inn, the first Chacham, Rabbi Yossi, says, along the way I met an old man, and he asked me a riddle. He gave me a riddle, and he asked whether I could solve it. So what was the riddle? The riddle was, Hadi Ulemta Shapirta Deletla Ainin, this beautiful maiden who has no eyes. And she is revealed, her body is revealed and concealed, I should say it in English. Revealed and concealed. In the morning, she is seen, so she goes out, and in the afternoon, she disappears, or she goes back in. And she wears jewelry that is not. That's his riddle. Who is this? So first of all, we need to know that this is related to the month of Elul. Because this Ulemta, this maiden, is really the mazel, it's the constellation that's related to Elul. It's called the Virgo and the Betula. So the month of Elul, why is the month of Elul, face of it, it's completely the opposite. The month of Elul, we come to the end of the year. And so we're not exactly new in the year. We've come to the end. But the whole purpose of the month of Elul is to uncover in ourselves that aspect which has never been contaminated. Even though we went through the whole year, what we try to recall in the month of Elul is that there's a part of us, there's always a part of every person that didn't take part in everything that happened. And it remains above it, and it's holy and it's pure. That's the symbol. So how is this possible? So first of all, this is the foundation of all Jewish therapy. That if I can help someone, it's because I can remind them of that part of them that's pristine and pure and clean and new. And we all have that. What do we call that? In the Kabbalah, it's called the Yechida. The Yechida Hanefesh. Right?
We call it the Chiluk.
So the whole divine soul has a Yechida in it also. But the divine soul comes down into the body. And then there's a big machlokus. What happens when a person does an Avera? Is the divine soul in there or not? So in the Tanya, on the one hand, he says that it's not. On the other hand, he says that it's the worst offense that you can have. You're taking the head of the king and you're putting it into a latrine full of soil. So it's a big question. But that's part of the story. The real story is that there's always a yechida. Whatever you look at, whatever, even in the animal soul, there's a part that never was. There was a famous story about the brothers of Lizhensk, Reb Elimelech and Reb Zusha. And so once they had an argument about who were they in Adam Rishon, because all the souls were in Adam Rishon. So they had an argument. So who was where? So Reb Melech said that he wasn't there. He's a new soul. He says, I didn't come from Adam Rishon. I'm not from that legacy.
It's possible.
It's a new soul. And Reb Zusha would have none of that. And he said, not only was I there, I was the part of him that made him take from the fruit. Okay? Why? Because Reb Zusha understands The whole point was that Reb Zusha understands somebody who does an Avera. He understands why. He says, I was there, I understand exactly how it is. So that's why I also know how to do tshuva. But you're completely aloof from it. You could never help anyone. You don't understand anything. So it's a big staple. It's actually in this week's Wonders. So there's a section here called Fundamentals of Chassidus. And the explanation here is based on something that the Rebbe Rashab once said, that if you've never had Averos that are the most grievous, then you can't understand Chassidus. You can't begin to understand what it's talking about.
I have such a burning question now.
So please.
How could the Alter Rebbe was a Neshama Kadasha? So how could he write the Tanya, and how could he understand everything?
He said that even when he wrote for a Beinoni, he went into that mindset. He knew Beinonim. He knew how they were. Okay? So there's certain things, because what does Chassidus do? Chassidus restores exactly that part of you that was never affected. And if a person was never affected, they don't understand what it's talking about. Because it says, to begin with, I don't have any problems. So, you know that when the Talmidim of the Maggid met, after the Maggid passed away, they decided they have to name this movement. They have to give it a name. So everybody wanted Nuata Chassidut. They wanted to call it Chassidus. There's a lot of good reasons. But the Alter Rebbe wanted to call it the Tshuva movement. But they didn't accept his opinion. So it's still waiting for someone to take it and say, because what does the Mashiach do? Mashiach ata le'atva tzadikaya b'tiyuvta. He comes to teach the tzaddikim how to do tshuva, because they don't know. Because they've never been affected by this world. They've never been in this world. They don't know how difficult the world is. So the first foundation of anything is to remind the person that no matter how difficult the situation looks, you can always heal because there's a part of you that was never ill. It never fell into the world to begin with. And that's what Chassidus tries to unearth. Like to teach you how to find that place again and to reclaim your true self.
It's only because you have that. So everyone has it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you could not have it.
Right? By the way, that's also true in couples therapy. That there it's easier because when you got married there weren't any problems. So when you got married there was that place. There was that place that because of that you got married. So now after many Gilgulim it's hard for you to find it. So that's but a good therapist, a real Hasidic therapist, what he does is he helps you find that place again.
Go back to the beginning.
Okay. It's not just the beginning, it's here right now. You don't have to go backwards in time. It's here, right here at this moment. You just have to have help finding it. So that's the idea of the Ulemta, this maiden. That in Chodesh Elul, on the month of Elul, we're looking for this maiden. Everybody has a maiden, whether you're a male or female, it doesn't matter. It's not. In this case, you identify with the maiden. And you understand that I have someone like that inside of me.
Ulemta?
Ulemta. Ulemta in Aramaic means like alma in Hebrew, which means a maiden, a young woman. Okay. So in this shir that Rav Ginsburg gave, so he went over 8 or 9 different explanations for this riddle in the Zohar. As it Hashgacha had it, last week we learned the Rebbe Marash, but it's still on the page. And this week we're learning Reb Nachman. So this is like an interesting twist of Hashgacha. And they come to teach in the Chabad house, and it's Reb Nachman's turn. So we'll see. So okay. Out of all the Rebbes, the one that he had, one might say the best relationship was the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe worked a lot to advocate for him. Wasn't easy at all. So let's see what he says about it. So he writes this in Likutei Moharan 62, which is a beautiful, beautiful Torah about kavanot ha'achila, about how to eat. So how a person should eat, when he should eat, how much to eat. And Reb Nachman says the general gist of the Torah is that you can't speak properly if you don't fix the way that you eat. Meaning that what comes out is, like we say, you get out what you put in. So if you don't know how to eat properly, if you eat from cravings or you don't eat the right things, so afterwards when you speak, so it doesn't have the effect that you wanted it to have. So there's a lot of kavanah in how you eat in preparation for what you'll say. So here, that's the general topic of that Torah in the Likutei Moharan. And then at the very end, he gives this interpretation of the Ulemta, of the riddle we just said. So let's read it. We'll read through it and then we'll come back. So, this is the aspect of a beautiful maiden who has no eyes. Everybody sees what I'm saying? Her body is concealed and revealed. She comes out in the morning and is covered during the day. She adorns herself in ornaments or in jewelry that are not. A beautiful maiden who has no eyes. A beautiful maiden is the aspect of faith. The aspect of you are beautiful, my beloved, as it says in the Shir Shirim. The aspect of and shepherd, befriend faith, meaning ur'e emunah. Ur'e means shepherd, you have to shepherd the faith. Who has no eyes. That is, the aforementioned questions that a person should not try to gain insight into. That's called iyun. But must instead be strong in his faith. So the first point he makes is that the maiden is faith, it's emunah. That's what it says in the Zohar a few times. Ihi emunah, she is faith. So in Stam in the Zohar, if we're talking about she, whoever she is, just any female, it's talking about faith. That the female, by definition, is faith. That's what we also say about Yetzias Mitzrayim. That b'zchutan shel nashim tzadkaniyot nigalu avotenu miMitzrayim. That in the merit of righteous women, what were they so righteous about? That they had faith, they didn't lose the faith. The men were too tired. They couldn't believe in it anymore. But the women kept the faith. And so they did everything they could to convince the men that the Geula is coming. They didn't know about Moshe Rabbeinu yet. There was nothing to talk about. It's the same way that it's now. So the woman is by definition faith. We'll see a little bit more about this later. And she has no eyes. What does it mean she has no eyes? He says, iyun in Hebrew means to study something rigorously. And when you study something rigorously in Torah, it means that you ask questions. Without questions, you can't study anything rigorously because you're just reading it. You have to start thinking, what are the questions? That's why we have Shabbos table, and we tell the children, so whoever gets the best question, I don't care about the answers. The answers not interesting. Maybe you have good answers, maybe not. But the real thing is, can you ask a good question that I can't answer? If you can ask me a question like that, you win the prize. Because that's Yiddishkeit. Yiddishkeit is, first of all, that we have good questions, deep questions. So here he says, and this is very typical for Reb Nachman, that he doesn't like questions about faith. That he doesn't like. Everywhere else, ask as many questions as you want. But when it comes to emunah, emunah has to be blind. Can't see. It can't have iyun. And we'll see what this means later. Her body is concealed and revealed. She is concealed, since if you ask a believer a reason for faith, he will surely not know what to answer you. That's what it means, that her body is concealed. This is because faith is applicable only to something whose logical reason one does not know. So that's one of the simple definitions of what faith means. That faith is when your reason fails you. When reason can't handle the question anymore, so that leads you to faith. You have to have faith in that case. Even so, it is revealed. What does it mean that it's still revealed? How could you be both concealed and revealed at the same time? Says Reb Nachman, that is, for the believer, the thing is revealed by virtue of the magnitude of his perfect faith. It is as though his eyes see that which he believes in. So we'll come back to this again, but the meaning is that for the person who has faith, it's not concealed at all. The faith is something very real. He sees the world this way. Okay. She comes out in the morning and is covered during the day. This is because a person's faith renews itself each morning. Chadashim libkarim rabba emunatecha. They are renewed each morning. Abundant is your faith. And it's a pasuk from Eicha. And is covered during the day. What does it mean that it's covered during the day? Due to burdens of daily existence, faith is covered over. So we'll come back to this also. She adorns herself in ornaments that were not. That is the main adornment of faith, is when those people who were not close to her are brought closer. What does it mean? So also we have to understand what that means. Okay, so that's his interpretation. So his interpretation revolves around faith. In the first class that we gave in the series, we saw the Maggid of Mezrich's interpretation. And his interpretation is a classic Hasidic psychology interpretation. The maiden is we ourselves. And what he says is that you should not see yourself. The key to a healthy psyche, to having a healthy mental life, is a person doesn't need to look at themselves. If you begin to see yourself, you're getting in trouble. You shouldn't see yourself. So for instance, I'm giving a shir now. If I see myself, if I reflect on the fact that I'm giving the shir, it ruins everything. Because at that moment, I'm beginning to look at myself, so I'm something in the world. The whole point of the Maggid was that the tzaddikim turn something into nothing, or being into nothingness. And it starts from yourself. That even though the way we live especially in the modern world, especially in the Western world, is that the most important thing is the I, is me. And so how can I stop thinking about me? Everything's about me. But that's the key to being healthy. And I'm just talking about the key to serving Hashem, because you have to serve Hashem, you have to be healthy first. You can't serve Hashem if you're not healthy. So first of all, you have to stop seeing yourself. So he interprets everything based on the notion of self-consciousness, of how much a person is conscious of themselves. So he says that the fact that she doesn't have eyes, that's a good thing, because you shouldn't see yourself. But sometimes she has to be revealed. When is it revealed? Her body has to be revealed. The Maggid explained, that when you do begin to feel yourself to be something important, and you begin to take center stage in your own, you become egocentric, so then you have to remind yourself about your body. Because if a person looks at the body and he remembers that where the body came from, remember where your body came from, and where is it going, and then you won't sin at all. Won't do any averos because you begin to understand. You remember that you're very lowly. You have no right to do whatever you want in the world, because your whole existence is one that started from something very lowly and it ends up with something very lowly. So how can you come in the middle and disrupt the world because of your cravings? So there he uses it that sometimes she does have to have eyes. Sometimes you have to look at yourself. So he explains that sometimes revealed means that sometimes you have to look at yourself. When do you have to look at yourself? When you're beginning to feel that you're important. So just look at your body, he says. Look back. If you look at the body, you'll see that you're passing. And you'll come back to the right proportions about how important you are in the world. Because people think that... But when you see that your life is very short compared to the span of the world, so it gives you a lot more perspective. But Reb Nachman in general wants it to be he wants us to be entirely blind. When we're talking about faith. Okay? So let's see this. So first of all, not everybody agrees with Reb Nachman. We know that in Chabad we don't agree with him completely. The Tzemach Tzedek, to put it more specifically here, Reb Nachman was very against his Hasidim learning, for instance, more in the Nevuchim, the Rambam's book of philosophy. But in Chabad they weren't against it. In fact, the Tzemach Tzedek wrote a whole book on it, Sefer HaChakira. And also the other works of Jewish philosophy, they weren't against it. They said it was brothers, the Tzemach Tzedek had 7 boys. So from them, 2 girls. So the 7 boys all became Rebbes. Each one became a different Rebbe. There used to be a lot of Chabad, not just Lubavitch. Lubavitch was just one. But Broisk and Post and all the others. So the other brothers complained that he didn't learn, that Tzemach Tzedek didn't learn more Nevuchim with them. He had only learned it with the Rebbe Moarash. So they asked him, why don't you learn it? And he was the youngest. He asked him, why won't you learn it with us? So he said, to learn more Nevuchim, you have to have a stomach that can digest snakes and scorpions. Because the questions in Jewish philosophy are very, very difficult. They're very difficult. Still, it's learned. Still, people learn this, and it shows up everywhere. By the way, there's quotes from Mor Nevuchim and Likutei Moharan. Don't tell the Breslovers. There's actual quotes. He put the quotes in it. But he disguised them as, it's my Chassidus. But it's direct quotes.
This is the Rambam.
Mor Nevuchim is the Rambam. But Reb Nachman took quote, even though he said not to learn it, he brought the ones that he thought that people should know into Likutei Moharan. In any case, who's this maiden? Let's go back to everything has an archetype in the Torah. So who's a maiden that doesn't have eyes? So let's think, which maiden do we hear about her eyes even? Leah. What do we hear about Leah's eyes?
She was crying because she didn't want to marry Esau.
So that's Rashi, because we learn Rashi, but you also have to learn Unklus.
They were weak.
What does Unklus way? It says it's beautiful. It says that Lakot means that they were beautiful. And Rashi says, he brings the Medrash that says that they were weak from crying. Lakot is like weak, and they were weak from crying. What does it say about Rachel's eyes? Rachel's eyes?
Beautiful.
Doesn't say. It just tells us what? She's beautiful, but it doesn't say anything about her eyes specifically. So before Chassidus, this passage in the Zohar was simply explained, and it makes a lot of sense, that the maiden without eyes is Rachel. Because Rachel doesn't have eyes. We don't hear about them. We assume that she's beautiful. But the Torah doesn't say anything about her. Leah, it does say. She had eyes. So Reb Nachman builds upon that understanding, really implicit in what he just explained, that it's related to faith, as we'll see, is implicit in what the Kabbalists explained before Chassidus. How so? What Reb Nachman is saying is that Leah and Rachel, they represent 2 worlds in every one of us. There's the world of thought and the world of speech. So Leah is the world of thought. And Rachel is the world of speech. How do we know this? So it's a little complex, but in the end, that's what they represent. In the world of thought, there are used that holy name to pass a river. He played some trick with it. Some people say he put a napkin on the water, and then sat on it and crossed the river that way. Whatever he did, he did. And when he grew up a little, he understood that that was taking God's name in vain, because it was just a parlor trick. It was for nothing. And he felt very remorseful. He had a lot of remorse for many years, until eventually he had a chance to make up for it. And how did he make up for it? He was once chased by robbers, and he came to a river, and it was a gushing river. And he said, now I'm going to cross without any trickery, no holy names, just by sheer faith. And he was able to cross, just because he believed. The faith is, we have this, because especially if you live in a Christian country like America, you have this picture that faith is dogma. It's what you're supposed to believe. It's like there's a list of things you're supposed to believe. But that's not what faith is. Faith is a tool. It's the strongest force in the human soul. It's what can move mountains. It's a force. It's not something you have to. It's like, oh, okay, I believe these things now. I'm okay. It's nice, but that's not the point of faith. Faith is meant, even the word itself in Hebrew, emunah, is the same as the word mana in Aramaic, which means a vessel, kli. Faith is a vessel. It's a vessel with which you can move your life. That's how you change. You have to have faith. You have to. In fact, faith is always about the future. Faith is even not about the present. The faith, when we have true emunah, we're borrowing from the future. A few weeks ago, I had a chance to talk about "In God We Trust" on the back of the dollar. What does that mean? What do they mean for Hashem's sake? What do they mean? What is this "In God We Trust"? What's that got to do with the dollar? Because what's the dollar today? It's not backed by anything. Since 1971, it hasn't been backed by anything. So what is it? It's faith. Faith in what? No, so they say, it's very interesting. They say, we trust in God. That what?
God will provide.
Yeah. What do you mean God will? Why do you have to say this? If it was backed by something, so you would say there's X amount of kilograms of gold for every $1 million, whatever. But it's not backed by anything anymore. So what is it? What is it based on? It's based on, you can print as many as you want because you're borrowing from the future, and you say, in God we trust that we'll be able to return it. Does Hashem really want you to return it? No, Hashem doesn't care. You can borrow as much as you want. That's the secret that they're not letting anybody know yet. They never plan to return it, because they understand that that's how faith works. They're right. They're not wrong. When you borrow from Hashem, Hashem doesn't expect you to return it back to Him. What does He expect you to do with it? What should you do with the energy that you borrowed from the future? You have to return that energy. You have to return it. You use it for whatever you want. That's what Hashem wants. Yeah, it just says, if I've already given it to you, use it for something good. But you don't have to return it to me. Somebody would say, by using it for something good, that means returning it. But I'm not really returning it. I'm turning it into something else. I'm never giving it back. In fact, if I'm a good borrower, the next morning I come in and I ask for more. But there was a famous tzaddik in Yerushalayim. His name was Reb Usher Freund. He was such a big tzaddik that when people came to the Rebbe, people from Yerushalayim would come to the Rebbe for a bracha. A lot of times he would tell them, "Why are you coming to me? You have Reb Usher in Yerushalayim. Why did you come all the way here?" So Reb Usher was like a Baal Shem Tov. He made things appear out of thin air, like mamash. Whenever he needed money, he said how much he needed, and people that were there, they testified to this. A person would walk in with a manila envelope, and give it to Reb Usher and disappear. And then he would count, it would be exactly the amount that he needed. So this happened more than once. Believe it or not believe it. I know the people that saw it. So, Moiftim aside, Reb Usher had this thing that he was a big Baal Chesed, and he built the first recuperation center for women after birth, after giving birth. And when he built it, it's in what's called Matzdorf. So when he built it, he needed X amount of money. So he called up his gvirim in different places, his rich donors in different places. And he told them that I'm building a center for women, and what can you give? So they each gave. And then there was one who wanted to surprise him, and he came to Eretz Yisrael. He came like the next day, he came on a flight, and he brought him a check for the whole amount, for everything that he needed. So Reb Usher looked at it, and he said, I really appreciate it, but I can't take it. He says, why? Why can't you take it? Now you won't have to worry. You'll have everything you need. He says, it doesn't work that way. You see, I don't need the whole amount right away. As you build, you pay the contractors. So I need small amounts every time. I don't need the whole thing at once. If you give me the whole amount now, what am I going to do with this check? What do you do with the check like that? You put it in the bank. And then what happens? Every time I'll need money, I'll go to the bank and I'll ask them for money. But I don't want to live like that. I ask Hashem for money. I don't ask the bank for money. So he didn't want it. That's what it means that you borrow from Hashem. Even if you have a bank account, you still borrow from Hashem. Especially when you're talking about Emunah. In order to do all the things that we need in life, we need a lot more than just money. We need a lot of strength, a lot of energy, and for that you need a lot of faith. So when you speak to Hashem, and when you speak to other people, it has to be with certainty that whatever, like if you go to ask a loan from the bank, you can't say, I don't know if I'll be able to pay back. You don't say something like that. You don't say, I don't know if I'm going to use it for the right things. When you come to Hashem, you say, this is what I need. You have to present it as that's what Hashem expects to hear. Sometimes you have to cry because it doesn't give it to you so easily. But if you do this and you teach other people to do this, then there's a mashal that Reb Usher used to say, then you can build a whole city. You can build the whole world if you come to Hashem and you borrow all the time from Him. But you have to feel that. You can't do tshuva. You can't begin to find yourself if you don't realize that you have to borrow from Hashem. If you think you have what you need, then you can never do tshuva. You can never get close to Hashem either. Sometimes people think it's something negative. They feel needy. Maybe it's for other people. Maybe you don't need to feel that way. But before Hashem, that's the ground floor. You can't build anything if you don't say, Hashem, I don't have. I don't have anything of myself. From myself, I have nothing. That's the maiden. The maiden has faith because she's like Rachel. She's like the moon. She doesn't have light of her own. Leitle migal me klum. She has nothing of her own. But to be able to ask, she has to have clear faith. Clear, concise, pure, and strong faith to ask from Hashem, this is what I need. So that's what he says in the first thing. You can't have questions there. You have to have a very clear idea of who you're borrowing from and what for. So that's the beautiful maiden who has no questions about her faith. Something that the Rebbe repeated many times about asking for Mashiach. Because the problem is that people who ask for Mashiach, they don't believe in it. Not that they don't believe in Mashiach, of course they believe, but they don't believe that asking for it makes a difference. We don't really ask Ad Masai. We say Ad Masai because the Rebbe said to say Ad Masai. That's what he said many times.
Yeah.
Why? Because we don't really believe. Because the faith is full of holes that are created by questions and doubts, which are not shaykh to faith. Doubts are very good for Gemara. Don't believe anything that the Amoraim tell you. You have to read everything. Look in the Mishnah. Is this what it really says? When you learn Shulchan Aruch, and one of the Nosei Kelim says so and so says it so in another place, you have to open the book and see that that's what he says. Always. You can't believe anyone. But when it comes to belief in the future, you have to have very clear faith and no holes in it, no doubts at all. Because you're coming to ask for it. So that's what he says. Ulemta. You have to shepherd faith. It takes time to build that type of confidence about that's really what the Americans mean when they write, "In God we trust." We trust that we'll never have to give this back. Don't think they're ever going to pay back the whatever they call what's it called, the deficit. What's it called, the budgetary deficit or something. They used to have something in Times Square. They probably took it down already, right?
Oh, yeah.
There used to be one when I was younger. There was like,
Yeah,
now it's $15 trillion. Now it's 20. Our grandchildren are going to. Nobody's going to pay back. For a second, don't believe it. In fact, it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the stronger you get, the bigger the loan. That's how it works.
Yeah.
Especially spiritually. A person who is a giant spiritually owes an infinite amount to Hashem. That's how it works. If you feel that you have something of your own, you're not a giant. You're a mouse. You haven't even begun to serve Hashem. You haven't even begun to understand what it means to serve Hashem. Because the person who serves Hashem, by definition, he doesn't have. So we began to say that Reb Nachman here, he talks about in this Torah about eating properly in order to speak properly. So what he's really saying is that to speak properly, you have to speak out of a place of not having. If you're constantly filling your cravings, then you're constantly in a state, there's no hunger, there's nothing in you that feels empty, that I haven't fulfilled myself yet. I haven't filled myself yet. So there has to be a state that I'm hungry all the time. Because otherwise you feel you're on the ball, there's nothing, you don't need anything from anyone. But no, that's not how I feel at all. In order to start speaking faith, that other people hear the faith, they have to hear that you're hungry. That you have nothing of your own, you're like the moon. You have no light of your own. It all comes from Hashem. Everything that I have from Hashem. Another story about Rebbe Usher Freund. The Rosh Yeshiva came to him once, and a lot of people used to come to him for eitzes, for brachas. So this Rosh Yeshiva came to him, and Rebbe Usher asked him about the yeshiva and how he was getting along, and the budget, and this and that, and everything that he asked. The Rosh Yeshiva said, Hashem ozel, Hashem helps. Hashem helps, Hashem helps, Hashem helps. So Rebbe Usher heard this for a few minutes, and then he said, no, are you going to ask me about how I'm doing? So the Rosh Yeshiva said, oh, I didn't know. How are you? Me, Hashem never helps. So, what? For me, Hashem does everything. He doesn't help me. He doesn't help me. He does everything. I'm like the cursor on your screen. This is where it's going to happen. That's all. I'm just a signpost, like Rabbi Yosef used to say. Ana simana be'alma. I'm just a sign. It's a sign. This is where Hashem's going to give. So that's the feeling. That's how it works. So I don't know how much time we have. How much time do we have? We took a long time in the first one. 9:21. Okay, so we'll try to finish quickly. And then he says that her body is concealed and revealed, and we sort of said the main point, which is that even though I can't explain my faith to someone else, for me it's exactly how the world is. Who is the first one to work on the eyes? Not just to have eyes, but to begin to to fix the eyes. What does it mean to fix the eyes? Fix the eyes is how you see the world.
Okay.
So who did that for us?
Huh? Where?
So we're almost at the end of the Torah. And the very, very last pasuk of the Torah, which we're going to read in a month, is Asher asa Moshe le'inei kol Yisrael, that Moses did in front of the eyes of all of Israel. Why do you have to say in front of their eyes? He did in front of Am Yisrael. Why the eyes? So it's explained, this is the way the Alter Rebbe explains this, that Moshe Rabbeinu had the perspective of Hashem. He didn't see the world the way that a regular person sees it. He says, Tmunat Hashem Yabit, he sees the picture of Hashem. Hashem doesn't have a picture, he can't put a picture of Hashem on the wall. Okay, so what does it mean? He saw the world from the perspective of Hashem. Tmunat Hashem Yabit means that he's seeing the world from God's perspective. How do you see the world from God's perspective? It's when you get rid of your ego. So when you get rid of your ego, you still have your eyes, and the eyes begin to see the world from a different perspective. What does that mean? The people come to you with questions, and you answer in a strange way that at first they're shocked. They say, how could someone say something like this? Until you understand that perspective is not the regular human perspective. It is something special. It is something different. So Moshe Rabbeinu tried to give us that perspective, to fix our eyes, to rectify our eyes. Le'inei kol Yisrael. He tried. What did he do? So there specifically it says that he broke the tablets. Why? To show us, so that the eyes would be rectified. You have to understand what it means, what the world is really about. It's not what you thought it's about. So in one place, the Alter Rebbe calls Moshe Rabbeinu the expert eye doctor. And he put all his healing in the Torah itself. The more you learn Torah, the more your eyes are fixed to see things from the right perspective.
That's why he's Raya Mehemna.
Right, he's the shepherd of faith. Because he's teaching us how to... So what Reb Nachman is saying is that when you are fixed in your faith, then you begin to see the world differently. So you may not be able to explain it, because explaining means something intellectual, something logical. We said that in that area faith is lacking, because it's not supposed to be based on iyun. It's not supposed to be based on critical thinking. It's supposed to be based on something beyond that. So you can't maybe explain it to someone, but you see the world that way. And so you have this barrier. So that this is something that a lot of Lubavitchers are in touch with, right? That I understand something and I don't know how to explain it.
Oh.
You say, I don't know. You have to experience it somehow. I don't know what to say. But it's not just Lubavitchers. When I was growing up, I was a big Zionist. So when I had to explain to people in America, because I grew up in Eretz Yisrael, and then I came to America, and I had to explain to them why Eretz Yisrael was so important. Says, I don't know. In the end, it's just a feeling. I didn't know. I didn't know Reb Nachman back then. I would have known then that Eretz Yisrael is an emunah. You have to have an emunah. If you don't have an emunah, then it's very hard to understand the value. Okay. The next part, he says, is she comes out in the morning and is covered during the day. He says this is the normal thing about faith. You should know that when you wake up in the morning, faith is very strong. Chadashim libkarim rabba emunatecha. Whenever you wake up in the morning, you're a new creature, and so it's easy to have emunah. It's easy. You see through the world. In fact, there was a controversial but interesting figure in Eretz Yisrael. His name was Shimon Peres. And Shimon Peres, he did a lot of damage and did a lot of good. He was a very, very complex guy. So they once asked him, what's his secret to being so productive? He says, I have to tell you, the one thing that I never miss is that when I wake up, the first 10 minutes I don't get out of bed, I think about the world. I just think about free flow. I don't start my day. I just have 10 minutes like that in bed. What does that do? It brings out your faith. and what can be done. He's loaning from the future. He didn't know how to say it in these words. But what he was doing was he was picturing the future and taking from it. And that gave him inspiration for everything that he did. That's why we say, right? Rabbi Emunatecha, that Hashem, you have a lot of faith. So usually people explain, Rabbi Emunatecha, be. Like as if you have faith in me. But you can also explain it just as well. Rabbi Emunatecha, you're giving me a lot of faith now. That's what you're doing at the beginning of the day. You have tons of faith at the beginning of the day. Yeah, most people wake up, they're optimistic in the morning. But then as the day goes on, they forgot why they were optimistic. Because he says that's how it is. Faith is like that. When in the morning she goes out, and then in midday she comes back in. She's gone. You can't. So you need to capture her. You have to capture faith in the morning hours. The last part is the most interesting. She adorns herself in ornaments that were not. So the Maggid almost says the same thing. He says, what are ornaments by a Jew? Ornaments are the mitzvahs that we do. When we wear jewelry, our jewelry, kafdalet kishutei kala, the 24 jewels that you put on a bride, they are the 24 books of the Tanakh. So when you learn Torah, when you do a mitzvah, you're wearing jewelry. There's all kinds of jewelry, right? There's jewelry that you put on your fingers. Why do you put it on your fingers? Because you're saying you have fingers that do mitzvahs. And then there's jewelry that you put around your neck. Why do you put it around the neck? Because it hangs down to the heart. Then you say, my mitzvahs are in my heart. It could be ben adam lechavero, it could be for other people, it could be davening, it could be many things. Then there's jewelry that you put, and this is not so common today, but if you go to Bora Park or you go to Bells in Eretz Yisrael, you'll see that they still have this. They have a tiara. Where do you put the tiara? You put it on the forehead. Why? Because you're saying that my thoughts are very worthy of being jewelry. Meaning that I'm either a big Talmid Chacham, and that's like the tefillin maybe that we put on, or as a woman she has Me'Hashem Isha Maskeret, it says that from a woman, from Hashem comes the intellectual, knowledgeable woman. So all the jewelry that we're adorned with, physically and spiritually, is about our deeds. So what does it mean to have jewelry that's not? How could you have jewelry that's not jewelry? Well, what would it be then? So the Maggid sets up, and Nachman probably built from this, but he went one step further. We'll see it in a second. The Maggid said that when a person does tshuva, then he makes jewelry out of averos. Right? You take something that was negative, and by doing tshuva, you turn it into something that's positive. So that's called jewelry. That's not jewelry because it's not a mitzvah in the Torah. It's on the contrary. It's what you're not allowed to do. But if you're able to transform it into a mitzvah, then you've made jewelry out of something that's... So how does he describe it? He says it's like taking junk from the garbage bin and turning it into jewelry. And that not everybody knows how to do. That only about Jews. But here, Reb Nachman's not talking about that. He's not talking about the person doing it himself. Here he's talking about, the whole thing is about rectifying your speech. So he says, the main adornment of faith is when those people who were not close to her are brought closer. So you would use your speech to bring to you either a Baal Tshuva, make a new Baal Tshuva, which is, by the way, almost like a prophecy here. That all these things that Reb Nachman said, I personally don't understand why, but a lot of people do understand why. It makes them do tshuva. And there's probably as many Baalei Tshuva who became Baalei Tshuva from Breslov, from his works, as there are from everything else. How did he do this? So it's all about the speech, he says. It's how you speak. If you speak in a certain way, people hear it. And it makes them do tshuva. That certainty in your voice, that certainty of faith, it carries over and people feel it. But in the continuation, he goes further. We didn't write it here because it's not in the same paragraph. He skips a paragraph and then he comes back to it. And he says, but the biggest type of adornment that's not an ornament, that's not an ornament, a tachshit that's not jewelry, that's not jewelry, is a convert. If you bring a convert, he says that is something that nobody could ever. Tshuva is in the Torah. We've heard of such a thing, but nowhere does it say that you should make gerim. It doesn't say that anywhere, and yet it says that's the greatest. That's especially pertinent today, because the only reason there's still Jews who are stuck in Golus is because we still have to bring. This is written. It's written in Chassidus, because the final rectification requires to bring every single human who is connected in some way to Yiddish, to Torah, to bring them to Torah. We still have to do that. We haven't. It says that that's what's holding Mashiach back. That we have. With Baal Tshuva, so I told him, you have to write quickly, because in a few years you're going to be Haredi. You're going to be like, and you won't be able to write the way you're writing now. You have to retain it. So, because you have to stay in that limbo between the worlds, so you can hold on to both sides. So he's so talented that he's able to do it anyway. So Baruch Hashem, he didn't listen to me. So what I brought for you, you can either, this is more than you need here, but this is Wonders. We put this out every week, and now I'm looking for how to distribute it in the Muncie area. This is this week's Kiteitzei, and this is next week's Kitavo, and this is Rosh Hashanah's Nitzavim. Rosh Hashanah is a big issue. It's twice as large. So I'm going to be working on figuring out. There's someone here who distributes to the shuls, so God willing, we'll start sending them.
Can you pass them around?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can take as many as you want. So, and we have home delivery also. So if you want to, I should have.
I got it once last year, but then I didn't get it again. So I usually print it out online.
Yeah. So now you can get it home.
Oh no, it wasn't one. It was called Via Bita.
Vabita, yeah. That was 2 years ago.
So this is kind of replacing.
Right.
We can put it in the chute.
Yes, definitely. I'm gonna bring a few to give to my husband to put in a couple of places. Can you
What?
pass
Put it in
them around?
the-
Yeah.
Thank you for shade.
Thank you.
I have a question
Sure.
that I'm not exactly sure how to frame, so maybe we'll work through it. So I love this concept of borrowing, and in order to borrow, you have to be pretty confident, right? Just the mashal of like going to the bank makes sense. I'm not going to ask for a business loan and not have a business plan, and be confident in my business plan. So one of the things I find the most, like when I work with clients, when they first get to me, it's this sense of like who am I to ask, right? Like I'm not.
Who am I to ask?
Who am I to ask? Like there's always this like smallness,
Yes.
right? So I think a lot I find that a lot of the work I do is in building
Mhm.
that confidence and that strength. But there's this like weird middle place that maybe you can shed some light on of building the sense of self without also creating such a sense of self. Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
you still have to know that it's just God, it's all God. So, I don't know if you can shed light on that.
So there's a big. First of all, this was the Rebbe's most important topic. Of all the topics that he talked about, having confidence, bitachon, was probably the most important. And he called it tracht gut wird sein gut, which means to think good and it will be good. But that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
That's also what we call passive confidence, because you're only thinking. But you have to do. And so how to do properly is a huge topic in Chassidus, and especially by the Rebbe. And Rev Ginsburg wrote a mimer that's like a encapsulation of everything that's been discussed in Kabbalah and Chassidus on this, called Emunah and Bitochon. So it's a very big topic of how you bring someone to have the right type of confidence. So the simple answer is, it sounds so simple, but the simple answer is that you do have to have, first of all, a sense of bittul, that you're doing things for Hashem. Or what we sometimes call lowliness, that certainly I can't do it for myself because I'm not that important. Yeah, I'm not special. I'm doing it because Hashem entrusted me with doing this. So it has to be something that is really my mission in life. If I'm going to just be doing something because I have some interest in it, that's probably not enough. You have to be convinced that this is what you need to do with your life. Now, you don't have to be convinced 100%, but you have to have some direction. In Chabad, it's not called bittul, it's called Kabbalah Soul. What does that mean? It means that you always feel that there is somebody commanding you above you. It's not a feeling that I'm doing for myself. So, after Gimel Tammuz, people started reading Igros. Why? Because then you get like a clear message. This is what you should do. Unfortunately, it's not always that simple. But you have to have a understanding that I'm doing this because this is what Hashem wants from me. If you have that understanding, then the confidence that you'll have is properly placed. Otherwise, the confidence, like you said, it becomes a type of self-indulgence. It becomes something that serves me. Because all the big shots in the world are very confident. They're not serving Hashem. They're serving themselves.
Right, they seem confident, but I think it's actually very insecure.
They could be. They could be that they're insecure. It could be that they're not.
It's very.
But I think, sorry,
So-
I think what you're also kind of shedding light on for me is, I have like a system and I teach a system and it always works, but I've never necessarily understood why the system works. But I think what you're kind of helping me to see is that as someone builds their sense of self and self-love, which you would think is like yeshus, only then can they start to see, well, what is that? Like, what is that special thing that Hashem put me here for? How could I start to think of what does excite me, what gets me interested? And then they can start to put those things together. If you don't have any sense of like worth, then how can you find that thing that you're here to serve Hashem for?
That is the way that it's presented today. But there are other ways of presenting it. That's why before we teach, we have this discussion at the school of Jewish psychology all the time. Which should we teach first? What we call bittul and shiflus, or should we first teach confidence and emunah and emunah?
It's a big question, especially when you're like in.
Because when you want to empower people.
Without a good healthy
Kids.
self-esteem, because you need to first be a person
Right.
to see how important yet nothing you are. So you need to first have the Bishvili Neva Olam, but not for the ego part, is how I see it.
So
But for the importance of existing, because Hashem cured, you mattered to be created because there's a mission that only you can fulfill. So it's not ego, it's value. I don't know.
That's tricky.
So can
We're always
you?
playing with that.
So the way that Rav Ginsburg always says is it's an aleph base gimel of life. So bishvili nivra olam, for me the world, that's just the base. There has to be an aleph before it. The aleph is einod milvado. You can't begin to have worth that is based on Hashem wanting you if you don't understand yet what Hashem is. If you don't yet understand Hashem is everything, I'll say it like this, especially by young people, worth becomes self-worth, is almost impossible to detach from social worth, from social value. Almost impossible. And so, and most people never get rid of that, especially if you grow up in America. Especially if I went to public school in America, and in public high schools, it's the pits of hell for that. It's unbelievable how terrible it is. And so people grow up thinking that my only value is if my peers hold me in some kind of esteem. To understand that the only value that I really have is because Hashem wants me here, I tell you, the people that I work with, it's a Sisyphean task, because you pull them all the way up to that mountain, and they understand it for a moment, that the only thing that can give me legitimacy, to give me value, to give me worth in this life is Hashem, nothing else. And then they fall right back down. And the next time they come, and it's again, somebody's told me this, or somebody told me, and they're dependent on their environment. Why you we worked on this, it's only Hashem. It's a hard thing to understand. There's really only Hashem. The only reason I'm here at this moment is not because you invited me, or not because of anything else, or not because the car worked or didn't work. It's because Hashem wants me to be here. That's it, period. There's nothing else. After that, then bishvili. So now I understand, if Hashem already put me here, there must be a good reason. So now maybe I should say something. Maybe I should, or maybe not. The good reason could have been something else. And then there's the gimel. And the gimel is gamzu l'tova. That even this, because life is very challenging and difficult. So from experience, most of the people that do coaching, or they leave the people, again, not because they mean to do any harm, but just because they don't know. They leave people dependent on success to find their value, and that is, it would have been better not to start, because now I've taken them up to great expectations, and who knows where they're going to be after it all falls apart. And it always falls apart, because that's how life is, because that's how Hashem built the world, that every world has a shattering. It has to, because otherwise you can't build a better world. And it just happens again and again and again and again, and that's the process that you go through. So you have to have this einod mivado first. So when you talk about self-worth, that's very important, but it has to be self-worth that comes from Hashem, not from myself and not from anybody else. And that's always very difficult to develop, but it has to be. So for that we have one course that's called rectifying, or understanding and rectifying the ego, and then there's the second course, which is faith and confidence, and explaining how coaching can work after you do that. So that's some perspective. Another thing I forgot in the car I should have brought was I prepared little cards that have QR codes so you can get to all the courses. Forgot about that too. it's a very, very important topic. Very, very important. And I wish more people would listen to these to this advice.
We have to. That's the only way the world moves forward.
Yeah.
So we just have to be doing it more and more.
Right. I hear a question today that keep me thinking like, and it goes to all what you're saying about the self being or not being like in Rosh Hashanah, should we thought about ourselves?
Only about Hashem.
But still, it says that we need to make him the king.
Yeah. Imagine that in the middle of a coronation, you begin to check your what time is it? Am I dressed properly? It's all about Hashem. And Yom Kippur, that's a different story.
In Yom Kippur, we should think about ourselves.
Then yes. Then there's already room. But that's because in Yom Kippur we stand like angels. When we think about ourselves in Yom Kippur, it's a different story than the rest of the year. Because there we see ourselves the way the Rebbe saw us. And we see the potential. And that's the goal of Yom Kippur. I can see my future self. And it says that's why it's even above Havaya, Lifnei Hashem Titaru. It's even above what Hashem planned for the world. I can reach levels that were not even planned. So I have to see myself in Yom Kippur. Yes, I can be that, and I can be that. But you can't wait until Yom Kippur for that. By the way, you have to start now. It says that you don't need 40 days to ask forgiveness. You can ask forgiveness in 2 minutes. These 40 days are for building a new us. Every person, for 40 days I can act differently. So he takes on something. I don't know, this year I decided that every day I would call my mother. It's a terrible thing. I don't call her every day. And she complains, and she's right to complain, and I complain. I forget. So I decided that I'm not going to sleep, and she goes to sleep after I do. So I'm not going to sleep until I call her. So far it's been okay for the last 10 days. Today was a challenge. But what?
Does she live in
No, she's in Eretz Yisrael.
Oh.
Yeah. Today was a little difficult. but you have to start. You have to start. So these 40 days, if you can change it for these 40 days, then there's a good chance that after Yom Kippur you'll continue with whatever you changed.
They say it takes 21 days.
Yeah, so we say it's 40. No, it's really, because until 40 days, you can pray to change the sex of the gender of a child. And 40 days was also the time that the Mabul was on the... By the way, the Tafshin Pei Gimel is equal to 40 Yom v'Arba'im Laila. 40 days and 40 nights. So this could be a year. You don't have to wait till Tafshin Pei Gimel. You can start now. Okay, but this could be the year that everything becomes a new world. 40 days and 40 nights.
We gotta show up for it.
Yeah.
But in principle, the less you think about yourself, the better. In Tanya, he says, think about, even in Tanya, he said just sha'a kala, she's like 10, 12 minutes a day, a person should do a cheshbon nefesh. And the Rebbe took that down to 0. He said only in very specific circumstances. Because usually nothing good comes out of it. Because when I begin to think about myself, so I begin to think about what I wanted to buy today and I didn't have time, and what I want to buy and I don't have money, and this and that. Nothing good comes out of it. Better to think about other people. So how can I help this person? How can I help that person?
Unless it's like you said, like that part that was untouched by everything.
Right?
But if you, no matter which aspect you're thinking of, the Rosh Hashanah part, the Yom Kippur part, or the coaching, counseling part, if you always think in terms of your relationship to Hashem, you should be okay,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's kind of
That
what
has
you
to be
wanna
the basis,
teach. It's
right.
the relationship.
That's the basis. Everything has to come out of my relationship with Hashem.
I mean, it seems like it all boils down to that in everything. It's all about relationship, whatever it is, whatever we're talking about, food, you know, anything we do in this, seems like.
Mm-hmm. So, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming all the way out.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
I don't know if I told you that I went to see an old friend.
Oh no.
Yeah, so
In the area?
He lives in what's it called, in Wesley Hills. I haven't seen him for about 15 years.
Oh wow.
We grew up together in Israel.
Oh
He
wow.
lives
That's
there.
incredible.
Yeah. And another friend came from Philadelphia to see me,
Oh wow.
and I didn't know where I would meet him, and so he calls me up when he gets to his relatives, and he says, "Okay, I'm on whatever the address," and it's 2 houses away from the friend that I went to visit.
Oh my gosh, incredible.
He saved me a trip.
Oh wow.
Wow.
You grew up in Philadelphia, or?
No. This friend, he lives in Philadelphia now, so it's just he came up.
Nice. Thank you.
Okay,